Incoming transmission from Podfleet Command on screen. Welcome to the final episode of Trek Geeks Picard Live for Season 1 of Star Trek Picard. My name is Barry DeFord, and I have been and always will be your inner light of remembrance while we look back at the season that was Star Trek Picard Season 1. If the internet drops, we will have our lovely and talented EBH, Mr. Dan Garcia from Trek Geeks Game Night, to make sure everything is running properly, though I do think the days of bad internet are over, thankfully. Also, this broadcast is streaming live on YouTube and Facebook, and also on TrekGeeks.com. Picard Live is proud to have Fansets as our presenting sponsor. And as usual, we will have some more information about them a little later on, including a special discount code just for viewers of the broadcast. And P.S., I think this is your final chance to get the discount offer. So I think we might as well just get straight into this bad boy with a hardcore spoiler alert to ensure that we are not doing anything silly. So let's throw the spoiler alert card up right about, I don't know, now?
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
So this broadcast is going to talk about specific character developments in terms of arcage. So like the whole meal deal, plot points of season 1, you name it. So there will be spoilers. If you haven't seen the first season of Star Trek Picard, first of all, you're in for a treat, but please stop now so that you don't have any episodes ruined for you. And when you're done, you can come back and see if my guests and I are on point or not. And my lovely guests in the comments you'll find are typically the ones with the most on point points, as we would say. So first of all, I want to say hello to everybody. We've got Horizon Brave, hello. Mike Bovia, good evening. Helen Reed, nice to see you. I like the good evenings to start. Jackie Hackney, how's it going? Nice to see y'all. Chris Hackney and Marina's here. Awesome. Christina, it's wonderful to see you. Brooke, holy cow, look at all these wonderful people. Debbie, oh, and there's Bill. Good to see everybody here. So I think first we might as well, because we're going to take it slightly differently. We will still go through our different title cards and everything, but we're going to be taking a much broader sort of idea. So in terms of a Picard maneuver, I'm not going to just recap the entire series because that would take probably the entire episode because a lot happens. So I'm expecting that most of you are going to know what we're talking about as we make different callbacks and everything along those lines. So I think it's a good time to introduce my guests. First off, we have the lovely and talented and often imitated, but clearly commonly replicated. You can definitely tell I've taken a lot of inspiration from this gentleman. Mr. Bill Smith is coming on tonight, and we weren't able to get Mr. Dan Davidson. He is unfortunately indisposed. However, we do also have Mr. Dan Garcia, who is welcome to pop on anytime as well to talk a little Trek with us. Dan, are you coming on too?
Awesome. I'm the replacement, Dan.
Hey, he is the EBH, so he's actually extremely important and keeps this ship floating.
Let's not oversell it. I mean,
I call myself Dan 1.5.
1.5. Okay, yeah. It's different iterations of different Dans, except we changed the skin each time. So first of all, Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Dan Davidson sends his regards. Unfortunately, he's a little under the weather. But hopefully doing well. And that's how we kind of got stuck with the better Dan, quite frankly.
Yeah, this is a step up.
This Dan works far harder than Dan Davidson ever has in his life. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to be here with Mr. Garcia. And no, I'm not feverish saying that. That's those are my actual feelings.
I'm putting this date down.
It's being recorded. Don't worry. And a legal and a verbal contract is legally binding. First of all, Bill,
I'll cut this out later.
Oh, okay. Cut it out.
You Kool-Aid me. No, that's not fair.
And that is when he left the broadcast. So first of all, Bill, you are wearing quite the duds there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you got on there?
Thank you. I'm actually wearing the Starfleet uniform from circa 14 years prior to Picard when Mars was attacked. The one that Picard and Rafi are wearing outside of Starfleet Command in the episode. And of course, I'm wearing the appropriate Delta, which you can barely see here. But this was a wonderful eBay find. There's a manufacturer out there who makes these sort of replica costumes, and it's really nice. It's a nice breathable fabric. You can see the cuffs have the points on them like they do in the episode. which
Oh,
is really
wow.
kind of cool. But it's a really nice quality. They did my Discovery Enterprise uniform that I wore to STLV last year. So I mean, it's high quality stuff and it's cheap.
That's always very good. So yes, we always try to promote the idea of wearing different outfits, and I like the idea that we've got basically some of the older uniforms and some of the new uniforms popping up. I have to say, it's sort of weird. Last Sunday we had off, and I didn't wear a uniform on Sunday evening, and I felt sort of strange, so I just threw one on anyway. So
Well, thank goodness you're wearing pants now. That's really all that matters.
Well, wouldn't you like to know if I'm wearing pants? Speaking of not wearing any pants, Dan, what are your sort of thoughts about this entire fiasco? You've been behind the scenes the entire time, listening to me pontificate about 1,000 million things. How's this been as a journey for you?
Picard. I was pleased. I have to agree with Shashank with a couple things, but I'm not as verbalized about it because I don't have, a video to put out, or I don't do reports. But I enjoyed it. It was better than I would think, or not. It was better than I would think after what I've seen in Discovery. I'm a Discovery watcher, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think, like I said, we're not going to be going exactly the same way through everything. So now, usually in the Picard maneuver, and we can throw up the card for that so everyone knows we're there now, is we want to reorient ourselves to a man who now has an entirely new arc to ponder, right? Our first segment is straightening out not just an episode, not just a premiere, but an entire season. So I mean, if I wanted to cliff notes this, it's basically some people have said some positive ways of putting Picard together. Other people have said that it's taken from a number of different things. A good friend of mine, actually, Bruno, he's from a very esoteric podcast called The Left Page, and he talks about how Picard might be something of an Avatar Dances with Wolves to a degree, where an outsider shows up, saves the day, and then becomes one of them, sort of idea. If you think of the movie Avatar, ultimately that's kind of what happens, or Dances with Wolves, or The Postman, or The Last Samurai. These kind of shows where an outsider comes in, and that kind of brings up the savior complex and everything. But I kind of want to look at that, and that's something that I've just been mulling about in my head. So I'm going to sprinkle that out into the comments section, and you guys tell me what you think. And if I'm sprinkling it. So I think, first of all, let's get on with that Picard maneuver. So first of all, Bill and other Dan, how does this new arc for Picard change your perception of him? I think is the first kind of main question, and to kind of add that little extra bit is, what would past you think of this arc, just as All Good Things Part 1 and 2 showed up? If you were to know Picard's story would go beyond the movies as we know now, what would past you sort of think, and how does this new arc change your perception of Picard in general? Is there something that stands out there for either of you?
I don't know that it necessarily changes my perception. I've always viewed this character as on a journey, even when during the times of TNG, and this is just another stop on his journey. It may not be necessarily one he intended, or was able to foresee for himself, but I feel like it's the kind of thing where it makes sense for him, especially for somebody who was as strident in his beliefs to, give synthetic life forms the same rights and individual liberties that humanoids had, to help declare their sentience and their freedom. So I have to believe that it's the next evolution, or for want of a better phrase. I personally am okay with it. I wasn't sure I was at first. But after having time to reflect, I think it's the kind of thing that I could be very happy with in future seasons of Picard, especially if they play the nuance of it, they play that sort of uncertainty that is bound to crop up.
What about you, Dan? Has your perception of Picard changed now that this new arc has been slotted into Jean-Luc's whole story?
I mean, we've always known him, the character, as a person who stands on his morals, whether it went with or against Starfleet's specific lines of rules. I mean, we've seen that a couple times in the series, as well as we've seen it in a couple of the movies. So it doesn't surprise me as the character standing on his grounds when it came to a push or a shove. Where I was slightly surprised, as we have to understand that even though Patrick Stewart, the actor, was supposed to be, it was 45, I believe, when he started as Picard. I think the character was supposed to be like in his 50s to late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So his Starfleet career had spanned close to 60 to 70 years almost. So it was weird. It was a little bit weird to me to see him, that 70 years of his life of organization that he supported, that he immediately turned his back, not continue the negotiation or stay inside and try to pull something out of it. Maybe temporarily agree to a situation to try to further the ultimate goal, where it was just abrupt. Today he was Admiral, the next day he was Picard. So it was a little bit of a change, but ultimately I think he redeemed his moralistic standings in the long run, picking up this particular situation and trying to improve it.
I think at that point he bought into his own legend. I don't think he thought that they were going to call his bluff. I figured he thought that he would reign victorious and find a way to make the evacuations of the Romulans still happen. And when he put that card out on the table, he never anticipated they say, okay, you can go home now. So I think it was a miscalculation on his part, rather than him just picking up and leaving.
Yeah. I think so. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just a quick counterpoint, not counterpoint, but additional point. But what surprised me was when they said, okay, Picard, then you're dismissed. He literally stopped for almost 15 years or 14, 15 years and just let it go. That was the aspect of Picard that was a little strange to me, because in his of course, the younger years, you would see him, even if he wouldn't give up a fight. And it just seemed like he kind of gave it up. And he pointed out that it was unusual for him. But at that point, it was just shocking to me that he basically...
Sure.
Yeah. I think Mike Bovia has a good point here. It seems in the beginning that age and circumstances had defeated Picard. It was good to see him more like the Picard we knew towards the end of the story arc. And I think that's about right in my eyes in terms of how my perception has changed. Kind of drawing from the Canadian background I have, not all of you might be familiar with a guy named Gordon Lightfoot, but there's a song called If You Could Read My Mind. And there's a part where he says heroes often fail. And that was actually the first episode of Politics that Shashank and I did, where we talk about how heroes fail. And I think this was a very good long-term failure that Picard had to overcome. Like in TNG, in the movies, he had these short-term sort of episode or movie length fails. For the first half of this season, Picard was getting sort of raked over the coals quite a bit, and to his own detriment, I think he was doing these sorts of things. So I think, being sort of agreeing with your own legend and also quitting so quickly, I think we really saw someone who we would think wouldn't do that. And it was interesting to see him have to pull himself back together. And the only way he could was with the people he was traveling with.
Well, and I don't think that it's that he quit so quickly. His last straw, his Hail Mary was saying, well, I'm going to resign if this is the course that Starfleet's going to go down. And the commander-in-chief of Starfleet said, yep, then I accept your resignation because this is the way we're going. He was essentially fired.
Yeah.
It's not about him just walking away. Although when he did, finally leave that meeting and had no Starfleet left, he realized at that point he was going home to do nothing but die. And that's kind of where we see him at the beginning of Picard in episode 1. He even admits at the end of episode 3 that, he was going home to die and realized that he still had more to do. I think that he was in that state of disbelief as well. So it's not that he gave up. It's not that he didn't fight. It's that he was essentially dismissed.
Yeah. Yeah, he was told to take a hike and be done. And I think sometimes there is that idea of making room and the concept of ageism and stuff like that can get people into this idea that, well, you're old, you don't have the right ideas anymore. And then there's also the with age comes wisdom sort of piece of it. But I think really what it boils down to is the institution of Starfleet maybe also sort of believed its own legend to a degree. So I think there is that sort of connector between Picard and Starfleet itself, and how these sort of iconic captains represent different elements of it. I mean, Sisko did some horrible things to get on the upper hand of the Dominion War, and he didn't end up getting booted for it. It was deleted. It was pushed under the rug, but he has to live with that for the rest of his life. There goes part of my desk. Just a second. Live television, folks. Yeah. This wheel, I've got a caster on my wheel that I bumped yesterday, and I think it's giving up the ghost. A few people have mentioned, just really quick. Let's have a look here. Someone said this a little ways back here. Jackie said that I love not only your fan sets display, but your picture of Data is giving me the feels as we talk Picard, Barry. That was intentional. Yes, Jackie. After actually what's been stopping me from doing a big reorganization of my office is this final episode of Star Trek Picard. So everything around me has actually been taken down except for this little tiny section. And I've got a little tiny Enterprise, and then obviously the beauty that is this Fansets display here. It makes me happy. So, anyways, thanks, Bill. Bill is giving me lovely faces. Well, there's more people talking about stuff, and now I've gone back here. So a lot of people are talking about the novel, something that Mr. Smith I will be getting to probably this week because I have a week off school now and don't have to think about that anymore. So I'll be taking some time to listen to the audiobook about Picard. I'm very excited for it.
I will tell you without spoilers, it is a fantastic novel. It kind of paints in a lot of the picture of the years between the Enterprise and Picard's dismissal from Starfleet. And it actually does go into that meeting that we see the flashback of, or the after effects that meeting that we see the flashback of between Rafi and Picard. Mm-hmm. So it's a great read. There were a lot of factors in play, and it sets up a lot for the series. So if you haven't read the book yet or listened to the audiobook, which is what I did personally, Robert Petkoff does a fantastic read of Una McCormick's The Last Best Hope, and I can't recommend it more highly. Nice.
Well, as we kind of move into sort of storytelling and how the story works, and basically I want to pay my respects to the new people to Trek, right? The people who've popped in during the Kelvin timeline, the people who've popped in during Discovery, and now maybe, who knows, for some, Picard might be their first experience with Star Trek. So being that we were basically nursed on Star Trek, the three of us, and for the folks in the comments as well who may have been around a little longer, or if there are those of you who are brand new to Trek listening right now and you're able to comment or anything like that, what type of experience do you think that this new series will have for those new to Trek who will, we can always hope, will go back to watch TNG, experiencing that for the first time? What do you guys think about that? Do you think that's going to be like maybe kind of like a kitschy 90s, like, oh, isn't that cute how Picard once was? Or where is there merit to that? Do you think that'll be a kind of a neat experience? Put yourself in their shoes is what I'm trying to say.
I'll let Garcia go first on this one.
Go, Dan.
Oh, thank you. The first thing is I'm jealous of them because they get to experience something that the three of us have known for over 30 years now. The thing is, so many of the stories of TNG, and I know they've covered it in Trek Geeks, and in fact, we covered it a couple times I was on there, that so many of these stories were forward thinking and foresight, so that even though, let's say, the back sets, some of the first season of TNG was a little rough, but the stories themselves still hold today and have the same meanings today, that they're going to be able to go and watch those and take away things other than seeing, wow, that's what it looked like in the 80s for special effects, huh? What are those strange little beings jumping around with their whips? Stand by for Deep Space Nine. They'll get better.
They'll get better. We promise. Bill, the new time watcher, what do you think? What kind of words or things would you want to say to them about that?
Well, the fact is that every Star Trek has been someone's gateway into the franchise.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Whether you started off with TOS or TNG, or I know for a fact that there are people who entered into the fandom through the JJ films and even through Discovery. And it has caused them to go back and to watch other things. And I think if they go back and they watch Next Gen, I don't think it looks nearly as anachronistic as some older sci-fi shows do. I think if you're watching the remastered for Blu-ray version, which I think is now on Netflix pretty much exclusively, I actually think it looks better than it was when it was initially broadcast, quite frankly. There's detail in it that I never noticed before. When I saw it on standard def television. So I think it holds up. The stories, as Dan mentioned, absolutely hold up for the most part, unless you're talking about Aquiel.
Yeah.
But I think as Star Trek, as storytelling, as science fiction for television, I think it absolutely holds up.
Yeah, I did a little thought experiment, and I went back and just picked 2 episodes at random, and I think they were in the same season, interestingly. But anyways, the process was I rolled some dice and just kind of found my way to a couple episodes, and I got the Drumhead and I got Power Play. And
both
I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
I guess the roll was in my favor because those are both just solid episodes. But let's just think about those 2 episodes for a second. And I thought, let's put those into the Picard, the recent contemporary Picard machine. And I think about the fight on 10 Forward during Power Play. The only difference is people probably would have died in the phaser fight rather than just basically getting they were shooting at each other and hitting each other like they were Nerf guns. People were getting knocked over, but no one was dying. No one was getting holes blasted in them or anything like that. And so I thought, there's some for TV kind of experiences, and this should be for the family. And then the same idea with Admiral Satie and Picard. I really do see bits of Clancy in that exchange between the two of them. It just wasn't any swears, but at certain points, I could see Admiral Satie looking over at Picard, being like, "You bleepity bleeping bleeping bleep. I'm gonna bleep you up the bleeper with the bleep," and and you can kind of feel that tension between the two of each other. But yeah, it's whatever evening sort of stuff. I know I've blown Bill away with all of my my potential bad words I've said.
I didn't know you were allowed to do that in Canada, quite honestly.
Oh, well, good thing the CRTC isn't paying attention right now.
So I have an interesting question, and let's see in relation to this. So let's say that people are unaware of Star Trek, and they have CBS All Access because they're watching some other show. Okay. And the first Star Trek they've seen, and we can put both of these in Discovery or Picard. Okay. But we're talking about Picard specifically. If they went back and watched the old series, do you think that a watcher that has only known Picard and Discovery would be surprised by the episodic? Because you got to remember, in the last 20 years, episodic TV has kind of almost phased away to a point. So going back and seeing the 60s and the 80s and the 90s and seeing episodic television, do you think that would surprise them or maybe even put them off?
Yeah, I think there's actually a comment that I'm going to bounce off of. Horizon Blue says, interestingly, I don't think this is a good show to start with. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's like that it's more for fans that have some prior knowledge. I think that's a good question. And Horizon has just said good question to you on that. And I think that's a good sort of segue to bounce off is, without the episodic, you're not getting reintroduced to characters. That's why they have to do the previously on Star Trek Picard thing at the beginning to orient you to what exactly is happening. Because with episodic Trek, I mean, you watch 3 or 4 episodes and you're going to get a pretty fair cross-section kind of dovetail of the characters, what they're doing and what's up. Things resolve, things go back to zero again. I like to call it the Simpsons effect, right? They can literally put an entire glass jar over the city, and by the end of it, everything's back to normal again. So I do think that episodic television is easier to follow. So you can't just dive in anywhere. You're gonna have to start from the beginning. And yeah, I mean, it could be a little bit jarring. The only thing I would say is that for pacing, right? Everything's a lot faster paced. Like, to go to a different franchise, look at the lightsaber battles in Episode 4, the 1977 Star Wars, versus the chop socky flips that Anakin and Obi-Wan were doing in the third, whatever, sixth one, and all the way to the choppy stuff that they're doing later on. I haven't seen the latest ones, so I can't really speak for them. But anyways, you get what I'm saying. So to some degree, I worry that it would just be boring because it's not as fast paced as today's television. But otherwise, I mean, story wise, again, I have to say, like, special effects be damned. They're good stories. Sorry, I went on there, Bill.
No, it's okay. I don't think anyone should necessarily start with Picard, but invariably somebody's going to.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, Patrick Stewart is a legendary actor and probably one of the greatest living actors today. And I know people who were not necessarily heavy into Star Trek who actually started with Star Trek Picard. I mean, during the run of this first season. So, and by the way, they loved it, and it's forced them to go back and watch more. So it's not terrible if they start that way. I don't think a lot of people necessarily will, but I'm all for more blood in sweat in fandom sweat equity. If they go back and start watching all the stuff, I don't think that the episodic nature of previous Trek necessarily helps or hurts anything. It's the way stories were told back then. Every now and then you get a one-off episode. Discovery kind of does a one-off episodic with Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad in season 1. Some could argue that the Klingon episode in season 2 was kind of haphazardly placed, at least didn't necessarily fit the overall plot and scheme. I think you'll probably see more one-offs like that in the more serialized shows, but I don't know that the episodic quality will necessarily turn anybody off or make them consume it differently.
Yeah. Late Deep Space Nine would be the best kind of connective tissue, I think.
One point on this, and
yeah.
In some ways, I think somebody coming in and having Picard as their first series, I think they might, it's going to sound weird, enjoy it more than some of the older ones of us, because they have no preconceived mold of who Picard should be. So some of the stuff that happened kind of was like, whoa, okay. But to them, they're like, okay, if that's how the guy is. And I think some of that, they might actually take a little bit more enjoyment out of it than some of us. They're resistant to that much, resistant to some of the change.
Or will it? I mean, I think that's more of a statement on the cognitive biases of some Star Trek fans. They want things necessarily the way they want them and not 100% of the time the way that they're presented. And that's not a criticism by any means. I mean, that's their fandom. That's what they want to watch and the way they watch it. But I think that's more of a statement on the people who come in with maybe subconscious preconceived notions. Personally, I don't know. I could be wrong.
Well, I want to go quickly through a couple of comments. There was a ton of comments. You guys are lighting it on fire today. So I'm going to just fire. We're going to pop through just one or two really quick. First of all, let's see here. Oh, Mr. McGregor, I think he's out of quarantine now. I wonder if the Picard novel explains that. Yeah, a novel. Yeah, I mean, everyone's talking about the novel. I think I need to read that or get to that sooner than later. Oh my goodness, so many people talking. Oh, I think Picard can stand by itself without prior knowledge to fully appreciate TNG is a must. I will say that my partner has only ever seen The Inner Light, and she's seen more episodes of Picard. So in that respect, going back, I think she'll be able to see things a lot differently, and I would be interested to know kind of how she feels about that. So maybe someday we'll do a podcast episode. I'll drag Stacy on the show, and as she starts working through the episodic Trek versus Discovery and Picard that she's seen more of, what her thoughts are. Well, I want to go on to No Pips, No Problem. We're about halfway into the show already, so I want to get to some of the extra little bits here, and I want to talk about Starfleet. So just so all the commenters, everyone on there, you are aware, listeners, that I have a larger question I want to ask everybody and get to is Picard kind of a story that is very much, or did anyone get sort of an Avatar or Dances with Wolves or Last Samurai vibe, where an outsider sort of savior comes in to save a group of people and then ultimately tries to pay the ultimate price and ends up instead becoming one of them? So, you think about the guy in Avatar, or you think about Tom Cruise at the end of Last Samurai, or you think about Picard becoming this AI golem thing, this synth golem. Is that a very similar story? And is that really kind of a thing? So that's the bigger question I'm just going to let kind of float for a minute. Right now, though, I want to get into our next segment of No Pips, No Problem. So this is the new dimension of Picard. This is him outside of Starfleet. And the first thing I want to talk about is Starfleet. So it would seem that Star Trek has evolved. Starfleet has always had an issue with its admirals, small bits of corruption, issues over morality, etc. The Drumhead, of course, does a really good job of that. Deep Space Nine, I believe, gives us the first real glimpse of Starfleet playing dirty to win. If Star Trek can act as a mirror to our own society, what is Starfleet really the reflection of right now in our society, would you guys say? Yeah, Bill.
I said, do you want to pick someone to go first?
I thought you guys would be jumping at the question.
Well, we want to defer to the host of the show, even though he's kind of a weirdo.
True fact.
It's hard to say. I mean, we only saw literally this much of Starfleet in Star Trek Picard, because the show's not about Starfleet. It's about Picard and this particular phase of his life. So I think, for me, I think that's a hard question to answer, because, I mean, I assume that, and rightfully so, that there are still ships out there boldly going and exploring and making first contacts and doing all the things that starships do. But we get to see this other sort of in-between that we have never been exposed to before. Maybe it's been created out of necessity. Maybe it's created out of some vacuum. I don't know. But I don't know that that Picard necessarily tells me more about or less about Starfleet, because we really didn't see any of it.
Yeah, I guess we sort of get a maybe it's sort of like when Picard broke up with Starfleet, we went and saw Picard. We never talked to Starfleet and got Starfleet's side of it, kind of deal, right? Yeah. What about today, though? Is there anything that you guys would say Starfleet represents in our society today that we can draw any parallels between?
So here's something. So I don't know if you guys pay attention to the news, but recently there was a captain relieved on a aircraft carrier currently stuck in Guam. Do you know this?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a captain on an aircraft carrier who asked for assistance, and for whatever reason, because of they have some disease that today's world has, okay, on the ship. And he asked for assistance, and the assistance was kind of released out into the public, and the Admiralty went in there, and the leaders, civilian leaders, went in there and relieved him of his job. This is almost a parallel to, not exact, but very similar, because we're not there. So we don't know the exact details, and we're not sure why he was relieved and things of that nature. So today's Navy in this country has similar situations that still apply to the future navies and cross parallel. So that's an interesting perspective of those of we've already discussed that I was in the Navy. So it's an interesting perspective on my part to look at an organization I work for to do things that is shown in fiction, which is weird because this happened before the Picard happened, before the stuff happened with the carrier. So there is civilian parallels even today. Bad situations in a large organization, but there's still destroyers at sea. There's still carriers at sea. There's still all those things. This is just one situation that's been amplified, and all the rest of the stuff around it was kind of ignored.
Yeah.
Similar to how this show is doing. It's concentrating on that one situation.
Yeah, and it's not to say that Starfleet isn't still providing humanitarian
Right.
assistance to other groups, other people. You know, there could be natural disasters happening on planets. There could be so many things, right? This is a larger operational body. And in the case of Starfleet, right, its main mandate is to serve the people of the Federation, right? The entire point of Starfleet is just that. There's a quick little part here about Picard paying the ultimate price. Jackie brings up an interesting counterpoint to me, and this is again why the commenters are so fantastic. She says, I don't think Picard paid the ultimate price by becoming one of them. I think becoming one of them gave him a reason to live. And you know what? I would argue the same thing with our friends from Avatar and Tom Cruise's character from Last Samurai and Kevin Costner's guy from Dances with Wolves. By becoming them, they get that new raison d'être, right? The new reason to be. And I think that's important that we think of it that way too, is that Picard had, as we said, sort of was waiting to die, right? He had sort of lost his way and had sort of broken off completely. And now we see him having a reason to live. And it is by sort of detaching himself from his anger and frustration with what had happened with the synth attack and how it was resolved. He sort of finds his own way and does get a better way forward. Everyone's making fun of my French and I can see it. So yes. Je parle un petit peu français. Je suis Canadien.
I have no idea what you just said.
It was a prayer for safe childbirth, Bill.
Oh. Well, good luck with that, Dan.
So anyway, I kind of went off on a bit of a pontification. There has been a little bit more talking here. Ooh, Marina just said something, and she's always got something good to say. The state of Starfleet and, on a larger scale, Federation and Picard seemed to me not necessarily a direct representation of a real-life entity, but more of making a point that it takes hard work to maintain a utopia. It's easy to become more complacent, less vigilant, less empathetic, and let things become more insular and tunnel vision. And again, this is why the commenters are so important, because Marina, I think, says it very, very well. At the end of the drumhead, what is required? Vigilance, right? Constant vigilance to maintain this greater and wonderful society. And I do think that's pretty good. I like that a lot. What do you guys have to say about Marina's statement there?
Well, she's spot on. And well, more importantly, vigilance is required regardless of the type of society you have. Mm-hmm. Whether you have a utopia or not, you have to have that constant focus. You have to have that constant vigilance, or else things can go horribly wrong, which I think kind of mirrors a little bit of today in some sort of microcosm. So I don't disagree with that, in any way, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on that one, Dan?
Nothing that hasn't already been said.
Okay, well, the other little piece of this is there is sort of an undercurrent, and you can see it between Picard and Clancy. You can see it the way Starfleet does get portrayed. You can see it even sort of in just sort of how things are handled in a lot of cases. And there's an undercurrent, almost like an anti-establishment sentiment in this series. Since Insurrection, the TNG crew, and by extension Picard himself seems to have drifted from cornerstone ambassador to exile, and Picard's redemption comes from breaking down his old tropes and behavior, sort of dislocating them from Starfleet. So like Trek, I would argue, is the most mainstream militaristic sci-fi out there, with Star Wars being militaristic but in that kind of more anti-establishment manner. Firefly factors in, Babylon 5 and Battlestar going more in the direction of Trek, but by bridging something of a gap, right, arguably starting with Burnham's actions in DSC's pilot. Does this mean Starfleet will continue to be a place of opposition and or an entity of to be resisted? Do you guys think that in season 2 and in other Star Trek's iterations, we're going to see Starfleet a little more as something to be fought against as well?
I don't.
No,
I think largely the thing that people had a problem with in this season of Picard was the ban on synthetic life, or creating synthetic life. That largely was the issue that most people had, in addition to Clancy's colorful metaphors. So we know the ban has been lifted, and obviously it was there because of a series of events that were laid in place by the Romulans. I have a feeling that things will normalize as much as they can. There's always going to be an element that doesn't necessarily agree with Starfleet. I mean, that's true all the way back to the original series, quite honestly.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's necessarily going to be a plot point or a focus in season 2. I think that they'll get past it because ultimately it's just going to become too tropey, and I just don't see that happening with this writing staff.
Yeah, fair enough. Dan, any thoughts on that?
So keeping in universe, I don't think it will be in future iterations, just because number one, the resources that having that kind of canon to draw off of is useful in storytelling, but at the same time, I think there'll be several elements that may be fringe. We already seen Section 31 type of thing. We've used it in several series, so I don't think they'll make Starfleet and the Federation itself a entity to work against as much as an entity to bend back into the straightness or the correction. They'll be like, okay, now that we established this is bad, how do we make ourselves better? And that could be things they do in the future of how to bring them back on track versus resist the direction they're going.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the redemption of Starfleet and Clancy, honestly, starts when she essentially tells Picard to shut the F up because she's sending a fleet of ships. And does she ever send a fleet of ships?
Yeah.
So, I think that Starfleet still stands for doing what is right. Starfleet still stands for doing the best they can in given circumstances. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be an organization with which we disagree or resent.
I like that. So last little bit on No Pips, No Problem that I want to talk about is for us, because there are a lot of us and a lot of folks who are talking, I want to jump into comments on this one especially. What is the most, and so Star Trek Picard isn't just about Picard, it's about all of the other people who sort of came together to build Picard back up. What story arc did you find the most attractive of all of the story arcs? Which one, I'm snap questioning you, which one pops into your head first? Because that's probably going to be the one that sort of attracted your attention and captured your imagination the most. Dan, how about you? Which story arc of the characters would you say do you zoom in on first?
So I would say, oh man, you're gonna stick me with names. Rafi.
Okay. Yeah.
When I first got introduced to her in the first couple episodes, I was very resistant because it was like all the things that we were told in 4 or 5 other series we got away from. But at the same time, she brings an interesting aspect, an almost a normal person's look into this world. And we've had several examples of that in over many, many series. But I like that we have a flawed character to the point that it's not just my character is not quite as strong as the guy next to me. It's actually she has character flaws like a real person would in today's world. Where all the other ones, their flaws were always, my drive is only 95%, not 100%. I could be a better person. So I liked the roundness. I hope they bring back the whole thing with her family, just because I feel like that was almost just kind of sitting off to the side. I think that'd be an interesting way to continue her redemption at a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill?
Well, you kind of asked where does my brain go first, and honestly, it goes to Picard because the series is him. The series was a lot about him finding his reason to be Jean-Luc Picard again.
His raison d'etre?
Yes, his raison d'etre. And notice how my jaw kind of shifted, positions when I said d'etre. Because really the only French I knew before that was croissant. Thank you. He has let down a lot of people, and that's not a Picard that we're used to seeing. And he kind of had to find not only his space legs, but his moral center again, because he did go home to die, because he did, essentially stop. and give up after he was essentially dismissed, summarily. So for me, it's always going to be about Picard, because this really is probably most likely the last chapter of this character that we'll see over these seasons, however many there are.
Yeah. Well, I would say Picard definitely stands out for me, but I would agree with Horizon Brave on this one, that and I think I called you Horizon Blue originally, but it's because I'm not wearing my glasses and I can't see, because Starfleet don't wear glasses.
You're allergic to Retinax.
Exactly. But anyway, Horizon Brave says something really important there. And I think that Rios is interesting. Now, I would argue that we saw a ton of Rios in several different holographic forms, but I do think that there's a lot more mystery to Rios that is still unanswered yet. And I would be interested to see more of him. I found him very swashbuckling. I found him very he's captivating. I mean, the actor Santiago Cabrera played one of my favorite characters in one of my favorite movies, Che Part 1. He played Camilo Cienfuego, which is an amazing sort of just steal the show kind of character. And he did as well in this. I really think he stole the show in a lot of cases. He is a very troubled soul. He's very angry. He's looking for a father figure in a lot of cases. I really think he could be a lot more self-sufficient, but he was unable to actualize the way he wanted to. And so he's sort of like a planet out of orbit, floating around on this little mermaid ship of his, living in a world where he's surrounded only by himself and his regrets. I mean, it is a very fascinating picture that gets painted. So, yeah. So let's have a look here. Some people had some points here. Jackie says Picard is made better through though with Elnor. Just saying, absolutely. Elnor was the sort of the innocence that Picard no longer had, that idea that there is truly good in every person he meets. That's a good point. Helen Reed, Raffi had a great arc, and so did Girardi. Girardi frustrated me a lot as a character. I don't know about you guys. What do you guys think about? I think Alison Pill did a fantastic job of making a character that makes you go, I don't know which way I want to land you. What do you guys think of Girardi?
It's a character that I think has a lot of potential. She's got an innocence, but yet not. She's really kind of a character drawn on a line, and she's clearly done some bad stuff, which allegedly she'll have to answer for. But I think she has an optimism, but yet also a naivete, but yet is probably more cynical than some of the others, which is really kind of an odd mix.
Yeah, no, it is. She is an odd mix, and I don't think it was necessarily a bad choice to make a character like that. She's very unconventional, though, I find in a lot of ways. But I don't know if that's a good or if that's a simple analogy or not. But yeah, I don't know. Girardi's just very unconventional. She's almost comically self-aware in a lot of cases. Like the fact that she's like, yeah, I killed the dude, and he was my boyfriend. Can't undo that one. And
nope.
But at the same time, like it's not like she's going to just give up and to do something so terrible, to fall so terribly on your face. I mean, I think she was also really traumatized by seeing the admonition, both in organic and in synth, which I think is fascinating too. But I think she's just a very complicated and strange character. And now that we kind of have this with her, Jekyll and Hyde almost. She's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde character, where she's got this innocent side, but then at the same time she can really monster it up, like pulling out synth eyeballs and stuff.
Well, she was clearly under duress throughout a good amount of the series. It's not like she wantonly, wanted to do things and just, committed cold-blooded murder because she felt like it. She thought there was more at stake because she was manipulated into thinking there was more at stake, and that these things had to happen because of Commodore O. And I use Commodore in quotes because obviously we know more about O now than we did then. So, there's a lot going on. I mean, is she more than likely going to be exonerated for killing Maddox? More than likely. There will probably be some kind of penalty. I mean, she's a medical doctor, so she's not an individual without skill. She wasn't there just because she happens to know something about cybernetics and robotics and all those things. She's she's a very, very intelligent and learned person. She just got caught up in something that she shouldn't have been caught up in.
Way over her head.
Way
Well,
over.
Well, one thing I will say, Helen and Horizon both say that seeing Laris and Jaban in at least a short trek would be great. And I agree. I think I would love to see them more in the second season as well. I'm also super thrilled with the addition we got to the Romulans, right? Sort of how they work through their dreams and sort of their deeper thoughts with that cool little maze thing. Creating labyrinths has actually been something in human history for millennia, right? Since the agricultural revolution, we've built these intricate labyrinths, both in our designs and also in the way we make our architecture. And they are sort of a meditative process, creating and finding our way through labyrinths. There's a lot of myth in labyrinths. So I found it was really fascinating that they would use that in the Romulan culture. There's something very cerebral about the Romulan culture, though they still have their own warrior class and everything. So that would be another sort of big thing for me, and something that I spotted a lot of people in the comments talking about, but I'm keeping up with the pace of the episode. So I think we need to take a second, because we're already 50 minutes in. Can you believe it, gentlemen? I would need to talk to you guys about Fansets, because we are so happy to have them as our Trek family and as our sponsors. So, there's so many ways to express your fandom, and I thought I'd just put this up here. I've never worn any of these pins, but they are something that bring me a lot of joy. They make me very, very happy to have, and they're really well put together. The artistry is fantastic. They're something that I'm very proud of, and I'm not really one to buy a lot of Star Trek stuff anymore, so I tend to be very discerning. And knowing that Lou, John, and everyone at the Fansets place are working their butts off to try to give us the best possible representation of our fandom, I think it's really great. And it's something that I think everyone should consider, especially in these times when businesses are having a bit of a harder time. It's not even Star Trek that you can look at too there. I mean, there's a lot more: Alien, DC. Picard listeners will get the chance. And I think, Bill, you can probably say yes or no to this, but Fansets is still offering the 15% discount code probably till just a little after this episode airs. Would you reckon?
That Picard Live discount code, which you can use in perpetuity, is good forever.
Oh, it is?
It will be in use well after, in the interim, the off season for Picard Live, if you will. But it is a permanent discount for Picard Live viewers and listeners, so you don't have to worry about that going away.
Thank goodness. I was worried there for a second.
No, Fansets loves Picard Live. I love Picard Live.
Aww.
And they wanted to be able to extend those discounts to the folks who watch that too, in addition to whatever other discounts that pop up from time to time. So
that's fantastic.
They have a lot of stuff coming out. They announced their huge Voyager 25 set this past week on Trek Geeks, which was really exciting. Their 7 of 9 Women of Star Trek pin, which looks amazing. And I just want to call out something real quick. Horizon Brave asks, wasn't it 20%? Horizon, it was 20% on the Trek Geeks live stream the other night. That is a code that is expiring on Wednesday, I believe it is, or whatever date it was that we said in the broadcast. This 15% Picard Live discount code is a permanent discount code that is good pretty much forever. And then, we also got to see the pins that they announced exclusively on Trek Geeks the other night, the Mako pin and the Voyager 25 anniversary pin, which are just, well, as you can imagine, they all look amazing. And it's 2 of the biggest pins they've ever done, Barry.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Because there's been some pretty gigantic ones. I mean, these ones, I don't know. The one in the center, I have been tempted to put on, but I just worry I would bump into something or it would drop off or anything along those lines.
Well, if you look at that TNG anniversary pin in the upper right-hand corner of that set in the frame, the Voyager 25 is even a little bigger than that.
Really?
And the detail in the Voyager 25 is absolutely amazing. And the Mako pin makes that pin in the upper right-hand corner look like it's a mini version. So
like a dime?
Yeah, it really does. The Mako pin is amazing.
That's fantastic.
And it's the Enterprise Mako, not the variant from the Mirror Universe or from the Franklin in Star Trek Beyond.
Well, Well, Fansets. their pins do truly have character, and we thank Fansets for being our presenting sponsor and for being the sponsor of the Trek Geeks Network. Well, gents, I think it's time we move into some supplementals. So basically, this is where I want to. I want to get into the Stargazer, not the supplementals. Oh my goodness, we are a little bit behind, so we're going to probably go about 10 or 15 minutes into the show, or into the next hour, if that's okay.
I can't
Sorry,
work in
guys.
these conditions.
I know. Okay, really quick. I just want to ask you guys, we are in a new normal, right? I mean, I don't like necessarily talking about the COVID sickness that's currently sweeping the world, and it's a really hard time for a lot of us and for a lot of people, and it's nice to get away from that and talk about something else briefly, even if necessary. But I do want to ask, with the new normal could be affecting actors, especially like Sir Pat, who very much, despite his apparent health, he is in an at-risk demographic. Do you guys see filming changing or delaying from this, or do you think we're going to see a new way through? What do you think, Bill?
Right now, as of this moment, I don't necessarily see a delay because season 2 is really just being broken right now. It's still in pre-production.
Mm-hmm.
So it likely wouldn't be before cameras before, I would guess, late fall at the earliest. So as far as that timeline right now, theoretically, nothing is impacted as of yet. Could it be? Absolutely. And depending on how long this social distancing or quarantine or whatever term you want to use extends and continues, it's just going to eat away at that particular time frame. Every other show in Hollywood and around the world that's been in production is pretty much shut down effectively. Some series have shortened their seasons. Didn't necessarily do their planned season finales for some shows. Some shows are still coming back with new content because it was shot before these sort of quarantine situations became into effect around the world sort of progressively. So could it? Absolutely. Is it now? Probably not necessarily for Picard. And certainly not for Discovery, since season 3 was shot well before this ever became an issue. It's in post-production now. So
yeah, which is fortunate. How about you, Dan? Do you think we're going to be seeing any delays? I mean, personally, I would say if they need to make a delay to ensure nobody gets sick, I am perfectly fine with waiting several months if necessary.
Well, a lot of production crews and stuff like that, because of where they're taped, they do short stints where they do this show and they do this show and they do this show, and it's not necessarily the same, the same distributors. So they might work on something on NBC this week, or this time, and then CBS something later. So depending on the contracts that they have for the production crew, if there's anything in there, I don't know the contracts obviously, but if there's anything in there that allows for them to delay, you're supposed to do this block, and because this block can't be done, you are obligated contractually to do that first. So it may delay it depending on the whole production crew. Maybe not the stars, but there's a good chance that the production crew might not be able to record due to prior obligations that are being delayed right now.
Sure.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I do hope that the crews and everything like that are able to keep their feet on the ground until things change. I know there's a lot of precarity out there, and my heart goes out to anyone who's having a hard time with that. Well, I think let's get on to some happier conversations in our Stargazer, and maybe pop into the supplementals as well. And actually, it is in the supplementals I want to go next to kind of move things forward a little bit. And this is something maybe just that I'm excited about. First of all, I just want to give one last quick shout out to all of the listeners, the people who've been commenting, the people who've been saying things. I mean, there's no way I can get every single person's comment up. You guys are always saying fantastic things. You have your own conversations on there while I'm jabbering on. It really is a treat to get to chat with you all once a week. And I'm really going to miss actually getting some of the takes. I found myself, when I'm walking my dogs or just doing something, driving somewhere, thinking about some of the points you guys have made, positive, critical, any sort of which way. And it's really helped me kind of work through this season a lot more. And it's actually given me a lot of material. So I really couldn't have done it without the people listening and commenting. It really means a lot. So mad shout out to everyone who's listened and commented.
I would like to add to that if I could. Simply speaking, as the co-founder of the Trek Geeks podcast network, I know I speak for Dan when I say this, but we are especially grateful, Barry, to both you and to you as well, Dan, for the amazing job you guys have done with Trek Geeks Picard Live every single week. It's been a great deep dive on Picard, and we have been incredibly excited, as everyone watching and listening has been. It's a testament to the quality stuff you guys are doing and talking about, and it has done nothing but represent Trek Geeks and Star Trek in the finest way. So my grateful and sincere thanks to you both for taking this on and for doing it. And I can tell everybody listening that absolutely you'll be back for season 2, whether you know it or not.
Well, let's just say that if it means I get to chat with all these fantastic people again, I would get right on that sooner than later. So here's my last big question for everyone, and then we can get into that fine little bit of is Picard sort of like the new Avatar or Dances with Wolves character? But this last little bit here that I think is a good positive question is the new golden age of Trek. And people have bandied that word about, and some people say not real Star Trek and all this sort of stuff. And I'm going to leave that out. I just want to say, 2 seasons of DSC, 1 season of Picard, short treks with more to come. Is there still the IDIC Roddenberry's vision still existent? There is still an IDIC Roddenberry's vision still existent, but over time, certain elements of Treks have changed. What new messages, if any, are you seeing from these 3 new seasons of Star Trek? Is there maybe an articulation of an old Trek message, or a new way of looking at it, or something new altogether for you? What is coming forward in I will claim the new golden age of Star Trek? I can even start maybe with Bill.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Thanks.
Brady Buncham. Brady Buncham.
I love how Garcia is just like anybody but me. That's why you sit behind the scenes, man. I think that Star Trek always speaks to the best hope for humanity. And there are going to be people who say they don't see that in whatever iteration. I mean, I didn't see it necessarily when Next Gen started because it didn't have Kirk and Spock. And you know what? I was wrong. It didn't take long, certainly before 1994, when I realized that Next Gen really did have all those things in droves. And then people said the same thing about Deep Space Nine, and people said the same thing about Voyager and Enterprise and you name it. So does it have that sort of infinite diversity and infinite combinations? Perhaps not in the way that people expect, but I think it does. We talk a lot about Gene's vision. And oftentimes when I type that out, I put the trademark symbol next to it because I feel like that's really kind of what it's become. I think it's been romanticized to the nth degree. And that's by no means a criticism, because we find a message that speaks to us and we put it back out into the world in the way in which we see it through our own eyes. So I think that time will probably prove that these new series kind of have the same thing going on, just in a different way. I see IDIC and diversity and discovery. I see it in Picard. I'm sure I will see it in whatever comes next, whether it's a Section 31 series or the long rumored Pike series or whatever else. But Star Trek is a product of the time in which it's produced. And these values, these sort of tenets that we hold dear as Star Trek fans, get interpreted by different generations. And I think that this is this generation's most current take on it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Dan?
Okay. Yes, there are. So TOS and a lot of TNG, we looked outward. We went and said that we were near Utopia, and that the issues were outside the Federation. Deep Space Nine kind of got on that fringe area where it said, yeah, a little bit Federation. Well, now I think this one here still has Roddenberry's vision, but I think they're reminding us that sometimes we need to look inside and improve us before we can improve others. So there's still the message that maybe instead of looking outwards, sometimes we need to look inwards and improve the situation. And these new CBS series are kind of showing that a little bit. So, yeah, I think there are new messages, and sometimes that message is, hey, look at us sometimes and make sure that we're doing the right thing before we try to go and tell other people, or not tell, but try to help other people do the right thing.
I actually couldn't have said it better myself, Dan. And actually, that was kind of where I was going to go with it. Is the difference I see with Star Trek and the kind of the darker feel that people talk about is I do see a almost surgical form of introspection taking place with the newer Star Trek series, and a broken or a damaged, or something happening, a damaged Starfleet, or a backwards this or that, or people swearing or saying bad things, or whatever. I do think that as a reflection of the now, Star Trek is still trying to explore strange new places. And I've always thought that Star Trek itself isn't an exploration of space at all. It is an exploration of the human condition. It always was, and it always is. And now it's entering into some maybe some deeper, darker, maybe more personal, ticklish territory that I think is the next frontier in terms of what we need to do. And so I do think that newer iterations of Star Trek might look at times like what we're going through now introspectively and incorporate those things into its storytelling so that we can get a reflection of the now in this space age show that we watch that really is an exploration of the human condition.
Well, I've said, and you've probably heard this on Trek Geeks many times, Star Trek has always held up a mirror to humanity, and it's just we haven't always liked the reflection we've seen back in the mirror. And I think that that's demonstrably true, especially now. If we had seen Star Trek first run in the 60s, I'm sure we would have had much the same reaction. I think we would have been bowled over by this series, but we would have very easily seen that it was a commentary on what was going on in the world. And if you look at what was going on in the years between 66 and 69, it wasn't pretty.
No.
You want to talk about racial and civil unrest. You want to talk about endless war. You want to talk about any one of a number of different things. The 60s had it. And I think that this is probably the time that is closest to that, at least in events. So I do think that perhaps the mirror that is being held up to humanity right now is one where we're looking at the reflection. We're going, whew, geez, I don't know, man. And we're not wrong.
No. Star Trek has always been a call to action too, though. And I think this is kind of where I wanted to end the episode, actually, is that call to action. And right now, I think everyone needs to be safe. I think everyone needs to know who's in their corner, who they can look to, who can help them. But as we get our feet under us a lot better, I think this is another big piece is Star Trek fans have been able to change things, right? They've managed to stop the show from being canceled in the past, right? By popular demand, this series just doesn't seem to want to die. And I think that's a really important thing. The kindness and the generosity, the humanity that I get from people in and around the Star Trek fandom itself, I think calls us to that. And it might not necessarily be us, joining up with mutual aid societies and helping, though that might be something we want to do, or maybe just helping our neighbors get groceries or something, but even just saying kind things to one another, making time, right? The greatest gift you can give a person is your time. And I do think that as Star Trek fans, we have that with each other. We can share that. We can look at that positive future, even when it's as dark as it can be sometimes. Like you said, Bill, in the late 1960s, I think there was a lot of people who were losing hope, and I think Trek was able to articulate sort of the impression of the time and give us a better understanding. I mean, I never lived in the 60s, but Star Trek really is my only link to understanding what people were thinking in the 60s, other than talking to my relatives who were alive then. It gives me a much broader, more sociological understanding. So as even a time capsule, I think Star Trek in its different iterations at different points truly is, like you say, that mirror of society in its different periods of time through this lens. So if it means maybe we can use that fandom as a way to be kind to each other in any way that manifests, I think it is it's something that Star Trek fans aren't strangers to.
You know, the future that we all hope to see, where humanity does better and humanity is better, starts with all of us today. It's not specious to Star Trek. It's all about being good and decent people. That's really what, you know, humans of the future are about. That's what the hope is. The hope is that we shake off this pettiness and this arrogance that we have as humans, to learn that there's more out there. And I finding that more out there starts with each and every one of us every day. And that's as soapboxy as I get, honestly.
I'm going to give you the last word, Dan.
I'm looking forward to season 2. I want them to do some background on some characters that they didn't quite fill in. I mean, it'll be interesting to see Jara's background. Maybe there was something that made her susceptible to the situation she was put in. Like to see them to do more with Elnor. I mean,
Elnor,
I thought he was very lightly used in this season.
Yeah, I could see some more Elnor. I'd be down for that.
I mean, he was basically where he was supposed to be when he needed to be, and everything in between was kind of like him standing there. So
he was Tasha Yar.
Yeah, basically.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And then I definitely look forward to seeing how they use the new synth Picard in the story of how that will affect how people interact with them.
Absolutely. Hello,
if
fans.
If it even changes.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're right in the sense that there's more to be told now, that this story has sort of left a few loose ends that I would like to see cleaned up. Elnor especially, Rios, and then I mean Borg Queen 7. That could be a really interesting an interesting arc, or maybe even another story they could head down.
Well, the more interesting arc for 7 is what's going to go on with Rafi.
Yeah,
I want to see that, because they're clearly growing closer. They are two broken individuals, and I look forward to seeing what happens with that. I look forward to seeing 7 more, which is something I wasn't sure I was going to see until that last scene of the finale.
Yeah.
So bring on 7 in season 2, because I'm all there for it.
Yeah, and the XBs as well. I think there's a lot to mine from there to articulate a new version, a redeemed Borg as well. Anne-Marie Segal, yes, I watched Star Trek for the relationships. Yeah, that is very well put. I love the ships in Star Trek, but also the relationships, right? The connections between people is definitely a really good point to bring up. Another little piece here, and this is just a little bit back. Horizon Brave says, Star Trek is at its best and most hopeful when it gives us a broken or sometimes darker view of ourselves. It's when it provides the most hope to me. Absolutely. Star Trek is, if anything, a piece of hope, right? The last best hope. That word comes up a lot, and sometimes it misses the mark, right? Aquiel was a tough episode. Prophet and Lace was something I can't say I've ever watched again. Like I've seen that episode once.
Nor should you.
And I am good. But I mean, outside of that, like. Yeah. Jamie McGregor actually brought up a really good point the other day. He's going backwards in Trek ranks, right? He's taking Jim's like least favorite ranked episodes, and he's working his way to the top. And he's doing that with Enterprise. So he's going to finish with the one with the Organians, and I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden.
The Observer Effect.
Observer Effect. Yeah. He's ending with Observer Effect, which is the best way to end Enterprise, I think, than the finale. But, you know, I mean, however we take our Star Trek, I mean, the idea of hope always comes in, always happens, right? Look at Janeway's face when she says, set a course for home, right? Like yeah, I got a 3,000-year trip ahead of me, but I'm going to try, right? That's the one thing about every person or every story in Star Trek is sometimes hope is what dies last, and it's what gets them through.
I have nothing to add to that. You stated as usually perfectly.
Well, there we are. Well, I'm going to get a couple last comments, and then I think we can call it a season 1 of Star Trek Picard, Trek Geeks Picard Live. So let's just work our way up here. Adam Sanders, Star Trek is redemption, hope, and family. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Some people are mad about Girardi being in jail.
Yeah, but it's just Jamie. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Chris Hackney, Star Trek Fenris Rangers. Yeah,
I'd be there for that.
I would be down for that.
Although, how do we know that season 2 of Picard won't be Star Trek Fenris Rangers? We don't know.
That could 100% be a thing. Chris was happy with Chris Mumphrey was happy with what Dan had to say earlier. I'm guessing it was something good. I wasn't listening, but
I don't listen to Garcia either. So
let's see
it's all
here.
good.
Well, I think we can call it. We can call there. Tamia Harper, thanks so much, you guys. I don't comment much because I prefer to listen. Commentary is provocative and insightful. The questions are awesome, Barry. Thanks, y'all. Well, thank you for listening and being even just listening is fantastic. And your comment now you're imprinted. You're one of the commenters, so that's great. Adam Sanders wants a Hugh and Seven origin story. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the other day, who would make a good young Annika? Scarlett Johansson might be able to pull that off. Even though I don't know, she might be the same age or young. I don't know age very well.
I don't think they could afford her.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. So, well, I think that we can call it on our discussion of season 1. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch more Star Trek discussion on the Trek Geeks Network. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TrekGeeks.com. Latest episodes coming out. Of course, Trek Geeks did one on Chakotay that I really enjoyed. Oh, you guys with Robert Beltran, I tell you, he needs. I would love to see him come on and talk to you guys. That would be a load of fun. So if you could check out the Chakotay episode, it is definitely a goofy, fun little. There we go. Akuchi Moya. Oi, oi, oi. Anyways. You can check that out. Trek Rewind always has some good stuff coming out. And Shashank and I will be doing some more Polytrex recording in the near-ish future as well. I know I'm going back to Polytrex. Now that I'm done here, I can go back. There's only so much Barry to go around.
I can honestly say you'll never be done here.
No.
And this isn't to say this won't be the last time people may see Picard live before season 2 starts. You never know.
I'm pretty sure I can't really quit the people in the comments. The people who show up on the show, you guys are fine. But like I've said, it's always a great thing getting to chat with all these fine folk. So I think we can call her a night, gentlemen. You guys, how can we find you, Bill? Where are you? Are you on any networks at all? Or
what is this network of which you speak? I'm really kind of... No, of course. I can be found on Twitter as at Trek Geek Bill. And of course, pretty much everywhere you find Trek Geeks, you're either talking with me or Dan Davidson, whether that's Facebook or Instagram or the tweet machine. And of course, there's our amazing Facebook group, our super positive Facebook group, Camp Kittimer, which is admin by the lovely and talented Mr. Garcia, also Jackie and Haley and Sarah, and Dan and I are in there quite often too. So a plethora of places with which to interact with everyone on the Trek Geeks Network, including you yourself, Barry.
Absolutely. And I need to be on Camp Kittimer a lot more often. And now that I'm working from home a lot more, my afternoons, typically, I don't have to drive home from work anymore. And so that gives me an extra 45 minutes both ways a day. So I get an extra hour and a half of like things to do. So yeah, maybe I'll pop on Camp Kittimer. I'll be on Camp Kittimer more often. That was bad. Yeah. Live TV. Anyways, well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this season's season of Picard Live. Yes,
I do just want to say we would be remiss if we didn't mention Trek Geeks Game Night with Mr. Garcia.
Yes, the Hathaway.
Yes, also on the Trek Geeks Network, you can find those episodes on the YouTubes, and there's actually now an audio-only version, which you can find on iTunes and all the other podcast platforms. And Dan does a fantastic job there as well, as amazing as that may seem.
He certainly does, actually. I'm quite happy with it, and one day, if given the opportunity, I'd even love to do a guest villain spot on game night to come in and maybe con it up or something.
Well, now that you've said that, I'm sure he'll find a way to work it in.
Oh, I would have no problem with that. I mean, at this point, you'll probably guess before this guy will.
Well, he's a busy man.
I know. But he's really busy when I blow up his phone constantly with texts. So
that didn't happen today.
True enough.
Oy, someone gets to slap me. That's good. Yeah. Oh yeah, Chris. Yeah. Chris says he gets to slap Barry. Try it.
Somebody should.
Yeah.
I'll explain later.
No, I'm moisturized. I'm ready for a good slap. Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in to Trek Geeks Picard Live for Season 1. You can check out all of our back catalog on trekgeeks.com. You can check us out on all the podcast doobly-doos out there. And until we meet again, live long and prosper.